Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the White House says don't report on the Pentagon leaks. So, the White House on Monday warned media outlets against publishing information contained in the top secret documents leaked from the Pentagon and other U.S. government agencies that have surfaced on the internet. So, this is White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby. He said, quote, without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain. It has no business, if you don't mind me saying, on the front pages of newspapers or on television. It is not intended for public consumption and it should not be out there, end quote. So that, motivated me to write a few more stories about these leaks. So these documents, which first surfaced on Discord, they appeared to be authentic as the Biden administration is scrambling to control the leak. Kirby admitted that the administration has no idea if more leaks are coming. Kirby said, quote, we don't know what's out there. We don't know who's responsible for this. And we don't know if they have more that they intend to post. So we're watching this and monitoring it as best we can, end quote. So then on Tuesday, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin vowed to turn over every rock to find the source of the leaks. Austin said, quote, now I can't say much more while the Justice Department's investigation is ongoing, but we take this very seriously, end quote. So some of the leaks show the U.S.'s war plans for Ukraine and expose that Washington believes Kiev is running out of air defenses and won't be able to gain much ground in an expected spring counteroffensive. The leaks also expose the U.S. spying on its allies, including Ukraine, Israel, South Korea, and Hungary. So they don't seem very happy about it. And, Kirby said that to a group of reporters, and that's basically what he's saying. Don't report on this. But it is getting a lot of media attention. Although, unfortunately, these media outlets are protecting the documents. They're not publishing the documents; they're just publishing details from them. So might not really be getting the full picture for some of these, and it's become a lot harder to find them. So the next one here, a leak suggests that Zelensky would hit Russian territory with U.S. arms. So this is from one of the leaked documents, and it suggests that Zelensky would use long-range weapons provided by the U.S. to strike Russian territory. So the document, which is a U.S. intelligence report, says that Zelensky suggested striking Russian deployment locations in Russia's Rostov Oblast using unmanned aerial vehicles because Kiev does not possess long range weapons capable of hitting targets that far. According to NBC News, the document said that Zelensky expressed concern that Kiev did not possess long range weapons to hit targets in this region of Russia during a conversation with Ukrainian Commander in Chief Valery Zaluzhny and another unnamed official. So Rostov is one of the Russian oblasts that borders Ukraine. And the document also reveals that the U.S. has been spying on Zelensky as it is sourced to signals intelligence, which means information obtained by intercepting communications. Ukrainian officials have been demanding that the U.S. provide the Army tactical missile systems known as the ATACMS, and they have a range of up to 190 miles. The longest range artillery munition that the U.S. has so far provided for Ukraine is the ground launched small diameter bomb, and that can hit targets up to 94 miles away. So the ATACMS would almost double that ability. So Ukrainian officials have insisted that they would not use these missiles to target Russian territory, but the leaks suggest otherwise. Hawks in Congress have been urging the Biden administration to send the ATACMS to Ukraine despite the risk of a major Russian escalation in response to advanced U.S. arms being used to hit Russian territory. So This is an interesting one, and we do know, there's been a lot of drone attacks, small drones that have gone into Russia and attacked things like gas fields. They didn't. This says that he's talking about attacking Russian deployment locations, like hitting Russian troops. They've been hitting kind of infrastructure, and they did hit a few Russian air bases and damaged some planes and things like that. But we haven't really seen Ukraine to attempt any attacks on, again, like formation of Russian troops. And that could be because they don't have the missiles that they want. So it's definitely a big risk if the US does send them. All right. So the next one here, leaks showing that the US spied on South Korea spark outrage in Seoul. So Pentagon documents that surfaced online that revealed the US was spying on South Korean officials have sparked outrage from opposition lawmakers in Seoul, while the government of South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol is downplaying the leaks. So these documents show the contents of a conversation between two of Yoon's top aides. They were discussing concerns about selling ammunition to the US, as they were worried that if the US transferred the weapons to Ukraine, it would violate Seoul's policy of not sending arms into an active war zone. So the US and NATO officials have been pressuring South Korea to arm Ukraine. Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, was over there recently saying, you guys got to start sending weapons over there. And these two officials discussed that it wouldn't look good. What they were talking about is how it would look domestically if South Korea changed this policy, as they announced that Yoon, the president, is planning a visit to Washington, and he's going to visit at the end of April. So I guess they're saying they don't want to look like they're trading, something for increasing ties with the US. So one of the officials suggested a way around this issue. They said they could sell 330,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition to Poland with an agreement that Warsaw would be the end user, meaning end user is the one that uses the weapons and it's not going to go anywhere after that. But they said apparently they could do this knowing that, even with the agreement, knowing that they will eventually end up in Ukraine anyway. So opposition lawmakers in South Korea called the revelation that the US was spying on the officials a super scale security breach and said that it violated Seoul's sovereignty. So this is Lee Jae-myung. He is the leader of the main opposition Democratic Party in South Korea. He said, quote, "If it is true that they have spied on us, it is a very disappointing act that undermines the South Korea-US alliance, which is based on mutual trust," end quote. So now Yoon's government is insisting that the revelation should not impact US-South Korea ties. And they're claiming that their defense minister, Lee Jong-sup, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin decided during a call on Tuesday that quite a few of the documents in question were fabricated. But that's just South Korea saying that. U.S. officials speaking to media outlets have said that the leaked documents are authentic. The only thing they suggested might have been altered was a paper on Russian and Ukrainian casualties, and they said that was altered after the fact, after it was put online. So I don't think what South Korea is saying is right. And I didn't see the US side confirm this. As of Tuesday night, I haven't seen the Pentagon. They usually put out a readout of the call, when Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin speaks with another defense minister. They put out a little summary of what they talked about. And I didn't see that. They haven't posted that, and I haven't seen the Pentagon confirm this. So, but it seems like, they're really downplaying it. And I think the reason why is because Yoon is coming to the US and he's really strengthening the US South Korea military alliance since he came into office in May 2022. He vowed to take a harder line on the North. The US is deploying bombers there, aircraft carriers, giving him basically everything he wants. So I think he doesn't want this scandal to affect these growing ties. He wants more. I think he wants the US to deploy nuclear weapons back to South Korea. They pulled him out of there in 1991. And he's also expected to address Congress. So I guess they just want to sweep it under the rug, but I'm sure the opposition is not going to stay quiet about it. We'll see how it all plays out. All right, the next one here, this is from Responsible Statecraft on another leak, and this is about Egypt. Apparently they planned to secretly arm Russia with rockets. This is from Connor Eccles. So, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el Sisi secretly commanded his government to send rockets, artillery, and gunpowder to Russia, saying in a meeting that the shipments should be discreet in order to avoid problems with the West. So the revelation drew immediate backlash from Washington, which has supplied Cairo with an average of nearly $2 billion in annual aid for the past 45 years. That's pretty big. And they have a quote here from Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut. He said, quote, "If it's true that Sisi is covertly building rockets for Russia that could be used in Ukraine, we need to have a serious reckoning about the state of our relationship," end quote. U.S. officials have denied seeing any evidence that the shipments have yet taken place, but the document indicates that Sisi's order came down just days after meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in late January. Given the importance that the United States has placed on strangling Russia's weapon supply, the leak risks blowing up relations between Washington and one of its closest allies in the Middle East. I mean, if it's leaked, then that means that the administration knew it already. But now it's public, I guess. The Biden administration has yet to weigh in directly on the accusation, which comes as Congress has already been pressuring the executive branch to do more to rein in Egyptian human rights abuses. After the State Department agreed to withhold $130 million in planned aid to Cairo last year, then Senator Patrick Leahy blocked an additional $75 million tranche of support despite opposition from the administration. So there has been some push to curb military aid to Egypt, so I'm sure that will increase with this leak. And we'll see what happens with Egypt. Again, though, the U.S. knew about this. But all these leaks are very interesting, and there is some more stuff. I'm trying to figure out what's worth, me covering and whatnot. And it's it's just tough to know exactly what's going on here. But it will be interesting to see. Right now the U.S. isn't commenting on specific things, but I think down the line we're going to know for sure what's right, what's not, and what really happened here, and we'll probably learn a lot more about it. And more could be coming, as Kirby said. They don't know. There could be more leaks. All right, the next one here is some good news. House Democrats urge President Biden to drop the charges against Julian Assange. So a group of House Democrats sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland urging the Biden administration to drop the charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who is facing up to 175 years in prison for exposing U.S. war crimes if extradited to the U.S. and convicted. So this letter was led by Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat from Michigan, and it was also signed by, all Democrats here. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Presley, Jamal Bowman, Cory Bush, and Greg Kazar. So Tuesday marked the day that they sent this letter. Tuesday marked 4 years since Assange was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London and sent to Belmarsh prison, where he is still being held today on no charges. Tlaib wrote on Twitter, quote, 4 years ago today, Julian Assange was arrested for publishing the truth. I'm leading a letter to Attorney General Garland, urging him to uphold the freedom of the press by dropping these Trump-era charges and withdrawing the extradition request, end quote. So the letter reads, quote, we write you today to call on you to uphold the First Amendment's protections for the freedom of the press by dropping the criminal charges against Australian publisher Julian Assange and withdrawing the American extradition request currently pending with the British government, end quote. So Assange has been indicted for publishing information about the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that he obtained using standard journalistic practices. If Assange is convicted, it would set a dangerous precedent and could lead to more charges against media outlets for publishing information the U.S. government does not want to be exposed. So that's the thing. He's a publisher. WikiLeaks is a publisher, just like the New York Times, just like antiwar.com. And, you see the story that was at the top of the page, the White House warning against reporting on these leaks. If this precedent is set, they could do more than just warn us. So the lawmakers point out that much of the information published by WikiLeaks was also published by mainstream outlets, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. They said, quote, based on the legal logic of this indictment, any of those newspapers could be prosecuted for engaging in these reporting activities, end quote. So the letter concludes, quote, every day that the prosecution of Julian Assange continues is another day that our government needlessly undermines our own moral authority abroad and rolls back the freedom of the press under the First Amendment at home. We urge you to immediately drop these Trump-era charges against Mr. Assange and halt this dangerous prosecution, end quote. So again, it's good to see. It's definitely very late, but better late than never. It was the same thing recently. The New York Times, a few European outlets that worked with the WikiLeaks, they recently sent a letter to the Biden administration telling them to drop the charges too. And now the next story here is dozens of politicians in Australia urge the U.S. to stop the extradition of Assange. And this is from The Guardian. So, Australian federal politicians from across the political spectrum have jointly asked the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland to abandon attempts to extradite Julian Assange from the U.K. The 48 MPs and senators, including 13 from the governing Labour Party, warned that the pursuit of the WikiLeaks founder set a dangerous precedent for press freedom and would damage the reputation of the U.S. Assange, an Australian citizen, remains in Belmarsh Prison in London, as we just went over. So again, I think that this is good. And in this letter published on Tuesday, the Labour Party, the coalition, Greens, and crossbench politicians implored Garland to drop the extradition proceedings and allow Assange to return home. The letter said, quote, if the extradition request is approved, Australians will witness the deportation of one of our citizens from one AUKUS partner to another, our closest strategic ally, with Mr. Assange facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, end quote. Thought it was interesting that they mentioned AUKUS in this, that they are very strong, military allies, especially now. They have been for a while, the US and Australia, but especially with this big submarine deal. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully this pressure, I think there's been some other politicians in other countries sending letters. Hopefully this gets us somewhere. And also on Tuesday, there was a rally at the Justice Department for Assange. There were some good speakers there. So hopefully this momentum keeps going. Yeah, it's been 4 years since he's been locked in Belmarsh. All right, the next one here, more good news, believe it or not. Progress in the Saudi-Houthi Yemen peace talks. So progress has been reported in the Oman-brokered Saudi-Houthi peace talks that are ongoing in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, as a ceasefire agreement is expected to be reached soon. So the Saudis' envoy to Yemen, Mohammed bin Saeed al-Jabir, is leading the delegation in Sana'a. He arrived in the city on Saturday, as did Omani officials who are mediating the talks. So on Monday, al-Jabir said on Twitter that he was visiting Sana'a, quote, with the aim of stabilizing the ceasefire, supporting the prisoner exchange process, and discussing ways of dialogue between the Yemeni components to reach a comprehensive and sustainable political solution in Yemen, end quote. So again, he said this on Monday after a couple days of already being there. There's this picture of him shaking hands with the leader of the Houthi political council. So it's a big moment. The fact that the Saudis flying into Sana'a to talk with the Houthis, this is very good. And this official from the Saudi-backed Yemeni government wrote on Twitter that the atmosphere is more ready than ever to achieve peace. So Hans Grundberg, he's the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, he said Tuesday that he was encouraged by the depth and seriousness of the engagement between the Houthis and the Saudis. So while the UN is not involved in the current negotiations, it expects to be involved in negotiations toward a permanent political settlement. The Houthis and the Saudis are expected to agree on an extension of a ceasefire that was enacted last year from April 2022 to October 2022. The truce technically expired, but there's still been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, which is huge. It's been over a year now. So now the big thing is to be lifting the blockade that is still in effect. It has been eased slightly, but it's still being enforced. And, the U.S. has lied and given political cover to the Saudis, denying that there's a blockade. The Biden administration did that, I think, back in 2021. But here, they're lifting it, and that's kind of the main crux of these negotiations that are happening right now is working out this deal to lift the blockade. So, while these parties are in Sana'a, the U.S. is nowhere to be found. Actually, I have to add this to the story. Tim Lenderking, who's Biden's envoy for Yemen, is apparently heading now to Saudi Arabia to talk with Saudi officials about this. So, hopefully they don't upend the thing. But again, this is Oman. Oman was neutral in the war, Yemen's neighbor, Saudi Arabia's neighbor, and they are brokering this thing. It's not the U.S., obviously. They don't really have a good track record when it comes to peace talks. All right, the next one here. Saudi Arabia is hosting a meeting on bringing Syria back into the Arab League. So Reuters reported on Tuesday that Saudi Arabia will host a meeting this Friday of Arab foreign ministers to discuss bringing Syria back into the Arab League, which suspended Damascus in 2011. So Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman said that the meeting will be attended by the foreign ministers of Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Saudi Arabia is expected to invite Assad to attend a May 19th Arab League summit that will be held in Riyadh, and this would be a pretty significant step in Syria's, normalization with countries in the region, as the Saudis and many other Arab League members supported the failed regime change effort against him. So the U.S. is opposed to regional countries normalizing with Syria. And when William Burns recently visited Saudi Arabia, he said that the U.S. was blindsided by the Saudi normalization with Iran, but also blindsided by their steps to open up with Damascus. So the U.S. isn't happy about this. The Wall Street Journal reported in March that Arab countries were looking to work out a normalization deal with Assad. And what's interesting about that is part of the deal would involve these other Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, to name a few that were named in the report. They said that they would lobby for an end to Western sanctions on Syria. So they would lobby the U.S. and the EU. So maybe that starts happening. And this could eventually lead to, especially if Turkey opens up with Syria, the U.S. just having no choice but to get out of Syria. And if all their sanctions on Syria are supposed to target other people in other countries that want to do business with Syria, but if all their allies in the region start doing business with Syria, I mean, can they really sanction all of them? They would probably try. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and the Philippines launched their largest ever joint military drills. So the U.S. and the Philippines on Tuesday launched their Balikatan exercise, which is being touted as the largest ever joint military drills between the longtime treaty allies. So the drills are sure to escalate tensions with China and include a provocative show of force in the South China Sea that will involve firing live fire rounds to sink a target ship off the coast of the Philippines. So this is a Philippine spokesman for the drills. He said, quote, "We have to fire at a target that is closer to what we would expect in an actual threat, which is an intrusion coming from an adversary by sea. We are demonstrating that we are combat ready," end quote. So the exercises sparked protests in the Philippines as there is opposition in the country to the growing U.S.-Philippine military ties. Demonstrations were held outside of the embassy in Manila, outside of the U.S. embassy in Manila, and outside of a Philippine military base. So there are people that are against this. They think that the U.S. is going to drag them into a war with China. So more than 17,000 troops will participate in the exercise, including 12,000 Americans. And the drills will run until April 28th. So that's a pretty long time. U.S. and Philippine military officials said that the drills will showcase U.S. warships, fighter jets, HIMARS rocket systems, Patriot air defense systems, and Javelin anti-tank missiles. The drills come after Washington and Manila inked a deal to expand their alliance by allowing a greater U.S. military presence in the Philippines. The U.S. military now has access to 4 new bases, including 3 in the north that can be used as staging grounds for a future war over Taiwan, and 1 on the South China Sea island province of Palawan. The U.S. has repeatedly committed to going to war with Beijing if this maritime dispute in the South China Sea between the Philippines and China turns hot. Whenever there are incidents between Chinese and Philippine boats in the waters, the U.S. reminds China that attacks on Philippine vessels would invoke the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty. I always mention that when I'm covering this topic because I think it's really, uh, kind of crazy that the U.S. is committed to going to war, over these rocks and reefs in the South China Sea. And it emboldens the Philippines to be more aggressive toward China. So there's that. And then the last one here, this is a story at the Libertarian Institute from Kyle Anzalone. Denmark building a coalition to send Western-made warplanes to Ukraine. Copenhagen is in talks with its NATO allies about sending American-made combat aircraft to Ukraine. Denmark's defense minister says that a decision is expected by the summer. Meanwhile, Copenhagen pledged to send 100 tanks to Kiev. So Denmark's acting defense minister said that Denmark is working to form a coalition of NATO countries to send Western-made fighter jets to Ukraine. Earlier this month, while visiting Poland, Zelensky referred to a growing planes coalition, saying that he believed the coalition would be led by Warsaw, because Poland did that with the tanks. They said, hey, we're going to send these German-made Leopard tanks, and that ultimately resulted in Scholz and Biden pledging to send tanks as well. So NATO members so far have only provided Ukraine with the Soviet-era MiG-29 warplanes. Denmark has about 40 F-16s in its air force and has suggested sending some of them. American officials and politicians have pushed President Biden to send American-made warplanes to Ukraine, but so far Biden has resisted. When he ruled it out, though, he said he was just ruling it out for now, and they are starting to train Ukrainian pilots. So, we could eventually end up where these planes do go to Ukraine, and that is one, way that at least some of these leaks might be able to benefit, the hawks in the Biden administration that do want to send this stuff, especially the one about them running out of air defenses and Russia possibly achieving air superiority in Ukraine. That can, be used as justification to send more stuff over there. So that's always something with the leaks too. But all this other stuff about spying makes me think that it was not some sort of intentional, thing by the Pentagon to get more support for Ukraine. But it was probably somebody within the Pentagon. That's what it seems to be. And we know that, Mark Milley was saying, months ago that even though he repeats a lot of the propaganda about the war, he was also saying, there should be negotiations. It's going to be tough. It's not realistic that Ukraine can retake all this territory. And when he was saying that, there was a report, I think it was in Politico, that was saying there's a lot of people in the Pentagon that agreed with Milley, but then the State Department and the National Security Council, not so much. So maybe somebody in the Pentagon that was just frustrated and decided to leak these documents. That's, my theory right now. Who knows? Let me know your theories, please. I'm curious. But that's it for the news. Go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Ray McGovern. Daniel Ellsberg's first leak helped prevent war with China. One from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies. Finland's NATO move leaves others to carry on Helsinki spirit. One from Norman Solomon. Daniel Ellsberg has foiled those who want him confined to the past. Two things about Ellsberg. And I recently listened to his memoirs, Secrets, which is really good. It was a good listen. I listened to the audiobook version. Really interesting. And I listened to it real quick because it had me, it really keeps your attention. One from James W. Carden, German rearmament and its critics. One from Ted Snyder, Macron goes to China. Whose side is he on? But that's everything for today. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. Download it wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it around. Tell people about it. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.